We want to call to order the Strategic Planning Committee meeting of Monday, April 6, 2015. And with that, Ms. Terry Cazzo will do the invocation, followed by the pledge.
Father, we thank you for this opportunity to be here this evening as we serve the citizens of Ascension Parish. It was indeed a beautiful day in Ascension Parish, and we look forward to many more. We ask your protection as we go into this hurricane season. Father, we ask your blessing upon each and every individual who works for the parish in service of the citizens. Thank you, and in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call, everyone's here, Madam Secretary. And number 3, public comment period. Anyone wishing to comment on any agenda item can fill out a card, and we will call you up at that appropriate time. Number 4, update on adjudicated property. And what we have on that, we wanted to keep you up to date for that. The RFP process ended on March 17, 2015. The proposals that were received will now go in front of a selection committee that will be held in the upcoming weeks. The selection committee's recommendation will then go to full council. So we're getting around to it, getting closer and closer to settling in on the adjudicated property issue so we can get somebody to head that up. Anybody any questions on that? Parish President.
Amanda's here if you want to get an update from her, too.
Lindsay, anything else? Okay, April 14th.
Lindsay, how many people submitted proposal?
I don't know for certain. I know that I had 2 emailing me with questions, so at least 2.
Good, good.
Okay. And Lindsay, thank you for all you've done. You know, I know it's a lot of craziness back and forth and everything, trying to tie everything in. We appreciate it. Number 5, proposed modifications to the drainage regulations for subdivisions. We had been discussing discrepancies or some conflicts in drainage issues between individuals and commercial and subdivisions, and so there's been some ongoing discussions between representatives of drainage administration and engineers that are working to try to solve these problems. And last month they had made some recommendations, and legal took a look at it and wanted to review that with the idea of protecting the parish. It had gone to O'Neill, in which he had made some adjustments and everything that would protect the parish from a legal standpoint. So they sent that back now, and I apologize, but we thought it was going to get out. The time was going to end up, we missed Thursday and Friday we were closed, and so that's why you didn't get it earlier. But O'Neill, you want to just give a rundown of what?
Well, we addressed the problem of the responsibility for doing those studies, and we went back and forth. I had some language, and I understood there was some problem with the engineer's insurance on that, so we went ahead and revised it. But they are responsible. Basically, we're responsible for the review. They're responsible for all the data, for the results, et cetera. And as far as the parish is concerned, that's what I'm interested in.
Okay. And that was a concern of most people. Basically, in a nutshell, an individual homeowner has no responsibility except for slopes and swale ditches to keep water off of the neighbor's property until it goes above 3 feet. And at above 3 feet, then individual would be required to mitigate if they continue to build up. and not go on piers. So that's an individual. We had, the problem we had was subdivisions were required to not be able to go anything over 3 feet, and so the changes that were made was to say that a subdivision not only has to mitigate after 3 feet, they have to mitigate from 0. So all ground has to be mitigated. They have to retain that water. And then the other thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the water going through a subdivision would be at a 25-year rate on that. So that was even larger. That was what Bill was talking about whenever he wanted the protection from the water going through a subdivision. So just to make sure everybody knows, which is, we're finding most of our problems are water that leads up to the subdivision and gets trapped by the subdivision. So, and Billy has been working on it. I'd like to get some comments from him, and we'll get comments from anyone.
Billy Aguilard, Mr. Kent, thank you. Everything you said is correct except the one thing. The 25-year storm going through the subdivision is not in this particular revision. It's going to be in the next one coming when we talk about the 10-year storm and the 25-year
Okay.
storm. It'll be included in that, but that 25-year pass-through is not included in this. This just has to deal with the 3-foot field regulation.
I know we had an agreement with it, that's what we would study, and I think Bill is requiring it on some of the events, right, Bill? Okay. Terry?
Bill, I'm pleased to see we've adequately protected people, the parish legally. In your opinion, have we adequately protected our citizens with this language?
I've been talking to Ricky last week, and so, in fact, again this morning, and I hate to throw a wrench into to this thing, but we need to think of it in terms of the 100-year BFE. And basically, purely from a drainage standpoint, and purely from a storage standpoint, anything that's built into a elevation below the 100-year BFE should be mitigated for, or build it on pollards, period. I mean, the logic is, if you're in an area, say, elevation 9 and the BFE is 6, I mean, just opposite, you want, elevation 6, and you want to build in there, if you put anything into that, below that BFE, you build that BFE up to a 7, I mean, you're taking away storage. Even though you've just put 3 feet of fill in it, you're taking away 3 feet of fill of storage, period. I mean, so you're not benefiting drainage, and again, if once you get past that 3 foot, you can go 50 foot. And you're not lessening the effect.
Well, we're taking subdivision regulations on this one, and we're saying that you have to mitigate from 0. So
Exactly.
this is what we're doing in this one for
But-
subdivision. We're not addressing
Right.
individual homeowners.
Well, I saw on some
or
of the individual
commercial.
lots under a certain size and stuff like this, at the 3-foot rule. But even individuals need to mitigate, if they're gonna build up and get above, if they below the BFE and they're gonna build up 3 foot of fill and get above the BFE, they're taking away storage within that BFE. Now, it's same thing with a subdivision. If the subdivision is building on a piece of land that is well above the BFE, I don't see, from a drainage standpoint, it makes no difference how much fill, because they're above the BFE. They can build it up as much as they want to. They don't have an effect on storage because they're above the BFE.
Right.
So, mandating that somebody has to mitigate for fill, if they're well above the BFE, that natural ground is above the BFE, really is not benefiting the parish any.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? Because it doesn't store anything anyway, very little.
And Billy, I know you comment on the.
Excuse me, Mr. Bill, if I may, Billy Aguilar
Yeah.
again. What's in the ordinance now is individual lots owners can put 3 foot of fill on their property without anything right now. And they can, with a mitigated plan, and what we're talking about is everything below the 100-year floodplain, okay? Anything above it doesn't matter. You do what you
Doesn't
wanna
matter.
do. But what we're talking about is if you need, say a homeowner needs 5 foot of fill to build up their house, they can do 3 foot of fill unmitigated, but the portion between the 3 foot and the 5 foot to the 100-year floodplain has to be mitigated. We just given them 3 foot, which is in the ordinance now. They can do it now.
I didn't see any reference to the BFE, the 100-year BFE, in the ordinance saying that if you're above, natural ground above the BFE, that it doesn't apply, but if you're below the BFE and you want to fill to above the BFE, then you're limited to your 3 foot of no mitigation. And that's where I had a little bit of a problem, because I started reading it, and I didn't see a whole lot of reference to the BFE, and making that the conditions, the number one condition. If you build below if you're in the natural land of the BFE.
Yeah, on the individual lots, you're right, it doesn't really, it's not really, it's not
Right.
really clear, and we could clarify that by putting
Exactly. I mean, that's
anything, in, I guess my question is, do you want to give them the 3 foot of fill below the BFE to begin with on individual lots?
I'm talking purely from a drainage issue. Any, a 1 foot, 1 foot high by 1 acre, that's a lot of storage capacity you're taking up. Even if you don't put the 3 foot in, if it's below the BFE.
They can put 3 foot of fill within 3 foot of the foundation underneath the house only, okay, without a mitigated plan. If they go outside of that, they have to do a mitigated plan for anything outside of that area. So we're only talking about just the area underneath the house.
But the reference, again, if the BFE is 6,
Right,
and right now they're at a 4,
right,
and they put 3 foot of fill, they're at a 7.
right.
They're above, at that point there, they're above the 100-year flood, and theoretically, they can go 100 foot high. It's not gonna affect
Right.
the
right,
storage anymore.
Right.
Now, the only exception is the 3-to-1 slope away from it and affecting other property owners. But in essence, if you got, it really doesn't matter. Once he gets above the BFE, it really don't matter how high he goes.
Right.
It doesn't affect storage.
All this intended to be is anything below base flood elevation.
Right,
That's all we're dealing with.
If we
But I
need to
think that needs to
clarify
be
that,
clarified in
we need
there,
to add that
because
sentence.
I didn't see enough
We will put that
clarification.
in bold,
Right.
that is only land below base flood elevation that
That's
we're
affected,
dealing with.
the
That
ordinance
is not
applies.
applied to anything above the floodplain.
See, and all we did was use the existing ordinance, and we just added to it.
And that's why we need to, if we're gonna tweak it,
clarify
let's
that.
tweak it all the way and
Right.
put enough language in there to make sure that it's understandable.
My understanding is the lead-in to this has that wording, so we can make sure that will
Okay.
be added as with O'Neill to do that. And
If someone can help me, and for the clarification for people who don't understand drainage, and I'm probably one of them, when you say that they must mitigate, what does that mitigation look like?
Mitigate basically means that if you got a big bowl, okay, and you're grabbing a handful of dirt over here at this side of the bowl, all you're doing is picking it up and putting it back on this side of the bowl. It's still in the bowl, so it's not affecting the bowl at all. That's mitigated fill, okay? If we take a dirt from outside the bowl and we put it on top of it, then that impacts the whole bowl. It's extra dirt and it impacts the whole floodplain. So mitigated fill means that you're just taking it from one scoop out of the same bowl and just putting it back in the bowl in a different place. Does that make sense to you?
Right.
The
Probably.
retention pond is basically.
And I got another.
I mean, I'm more
Mr.
concerned
Chairman.
about it making sense to everybody who's watching this. I mean, I've got the resources of Bill Rue and lots of other folks. I can go ask for more clarification. But when we start talking about this stuff and folks are watching, I think that it's just hard to understand. And my concern is anthills and people having water running off onto them based on what we did. And if you're just moving water around dirt around on a lot, I'm not sure that solves that problem.
Well, it doesn't, and you're right, it doesn't, but that's where it comes in. If they're gonna do over 3 foot of fill, individual lot, I'm not talking about individual lots. Typically subdivisions take care of that in their plan because the parish is reviewing it. But we can't put water on adjacent property next to a subdivision. But on an individual lot, if they go over 3 foot of fill, they have to do swell ditches and they have to divert the water away from the neighbor's property. And that's part of, that's in here,
And who's responsible for the maintenance of those swell ditches?
the lot owner.
Thank you.
And to let everybody know, this is not just a one thing. This is in combination with what we've done in the past of including the amount of slope that's allowed so that we don't just abruptly have the water go to the boundary of a lot. And if it does come to the boundary, the homeowner has to do a swale ditch to keep the water off the adjacent property, which is really what got all of this started, is that when people had to build up more, people were putting water on the adjacent property, on the neighbor's property. And that's all we wanted to stop. So it's a combination of mitigation, where you contain the water that you have, the amount of slope that you're allowed, and the swale ditches that you have to place in order to keep the water off of your neighbor. If you are, I had one today that called me and was concerned about this. We turned it over to, and they sent somebody to investigate that as the beginning of construction. So it is something that, that is being looked at. And so we just had a difference of the individual homeowners did not mitigate up to 3 feet, and subdivisions had to mitigate up to 3 feet and wasn't allowed anything after that. So we were trying to address the subdivision in this one and get the wording straight. Benny?
And you said it exactly right, Kent, in that what brought this about was the ant piles and trying to mitigate the issue of water being drained on other people, on the neighbor's property. But it was also another thing, and when this came to us, that we started that you had to mitigate. You could do up to 3 foot, but you had to mitigate it. And the problem with that is that you still, the point that Bill makes is exactly right. If you had to 3 foot, you had to do, or above, you had to do piles. So you had to mitigate prior to the 3 foot. Now we're saying you can do 3 feet without any mitigation. And I don't care how much you slope it, if it runs closer to your neighbor's property, you're not mitigating that, and you're not stopping it from going into your neighbor's property. So we still haven't solved the original problem. If you on a 100-foot lot and you got to go up 3 feet, you slope it out there, you're still pushing neighbor water out from where that pad is towards your neighbors, and it's going to go to the lowest level. And if that's your neighbor's property, that's what it's going to be. And so we still haven't, in my mind, accomplished what we initially started out to do, which was to keep that from happening. And so if we're going to go and say up to 3 feet, you still got to keep it off your neighbor's property with swell ditches or whatever. And then after 3 feet, the original thing, or what we came up with initially, was after 3 feet, you had to go to piles. You couldn't mitigate any higher than that, because then you get into the problem exactly what Bill was alluding to. We continually building up around in different areas, whether it's a subdivision or individual homeowners, you're changing what the base location of where water is going to be at. And I get Billy's concept of, if I take a spoon here and I put it on this other part of this bowl, that I'm not changing that. To a certain extent, that's correct, but to another certain extent, that's not. All you got to do is ride down Highway 42 and see where you got a land that was 4 or 5 foot below the road that's now 2 or 3 feet above the road. Where water used to be, it's not going to be there anymore, and it's not going directly into that pond. Now we're going to accomplish some of that by the new drainage, but I would like to study this some more to make sure that what we're actually trying to do, or what we actually intended to start doing with this thing, that we're actually accomplishing. And I get all the other arguments with it, and I'm sympathetic to some of those, but at the end of the day, certain parts of this I don't believe, and I haven't studied it closely yet, and that's part of my fault, but with the new changes, I'm hoping we have a little bit more time to look through this thing to make sure that we understand what it is we're doing this time, and that we don't pass this ordinance like we did the last time, and all of a sudden what we thought we were passing and what we have now is two different things. I want to make sure we get this right as much as possible. That's my take on it.
Doc?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess this question goes to Mr. Rue and maybe even yourself, Mr. Aguirre, I'm not sure. I'm looking on page 9 of 17, number 3. The topic there is residential lots, added now as tracts, parcels, et cetera, where greater than 36 inches of fill is required. Subpart AII states, the determining criteria for land subject to this requirement shall be all land below the basal flood elevation, as determined by actual on-the-ground, I struck through that, so I can't read that. Contours to the official parish benchmark system, regardless of whether the FEMA and flood insurance rate maps are firm, depict the property in question to be in a recognized flood zone. Now, that sentence and maybe it doesn't go elsewhere, is under, as I said, subpart 3. So I backed up and looked at 2 and 1. 1 says for lots smaller than half acre. 2 says for lots, tracts, and parcels, and we might want to even be considered adding that added language even on the number 1, tracts and parcels, larger than a half acre, so we're relating it to size. But the third one just has to do with for residential lots, tracts, parcels, et cetera, where greater than 36 of field is required. Does that kind of make sense to you as to what you were talking about? If let's say it's 5 foot down and we have 3 feet we're putting in there, we're taking away certainly that volume of storage, but we still have 2 more feet. But is that only applicable to the,
Yeah, Doc, this was the language in the original ordinance, and
This
we
is just
we didn't
crazy.
change that at all. We just left it like it was originally wrote. I mean, if we want to clarify it, we can clarify that, but and according to what Mr. Bill's saying, under subdivisions, it says it's got to be below the base flood elevation for mitigated fill. And it's below surface water and base flood elevations where you get your mitigated fill from. It doesn't specifically say that on individual lots, but we can clarify that and put the same language on the 2 lots under a half acre and lots over a half acre.
yeah, because to me, I think Mr. Rue has a point relative to, and I can't remember the exact quote, maybe there's not enough referencing to BFE.
Right.
Or AVF.
And we can clarify that in the first sentence when it comes to
there is,
fill
by the
placed
way-
on lots, and just put it, to cover everything that you put fill underneath. We'll put it in the original, if you go back to page 7, where it says placement of fill, we'll put it under placement of fill to where it references BFE for the entire
And
fill
while
language.
while you add it on page 7, it's interesting where it talks about the proposed certificate of elevation shall be submitted for any structure to be built and placed in any lot, any, prior to any permit being, any again, which shall include but not be limited to the following information. And general information is in the first 3, but at the top of page 8, talks about a firm panel number and a firm zone base flood elevation of adjacent base flood elevation.
That's for a base flood elevation certificate they have to get in order to get a building permit to build on a lot. That's required by the building department.
And that's where you find out about whether you're below the flood stage or
Right.
not. And that's what's in here. This is not any different than what we're doing right now, except that we're clarifying the subdivisions, and we're putting subdivisions and commercial in the same boat.
Right.
And we're asking that subdivisions and commercial mitigate from 0.
Right, that's correct.
And that's, basically, that's all we're doing.
And
In
if-
this particular thing, we're not attempting to do anything different with residential right now. I think that's gonna be a different battle that we can, address at another time. If we get past this one right here where, because it's complicated enough, it's not really that complicated, but it makes it seem very complicated. If we can address this issue right here, take care of this, then I know there's some issues among the councilmen with how far do we go with residential? Do we make residential do the same thing and them get an engineer for each house they build and things of that sort? And how far do we want to go with that? So I think we ought to do that with a separate deal that we would come through a modification with individual homeowners. But right now, we're looking at subdivisions and commercial, which we should put in the same boat. Yes, sir.
Only thing I want to say is that you need to think about what's going to happen here if we get to the 500-year flood, and they use that as your base elevation. Everybody in Ascension Parish and pretty much South Louisiana, I don't care how high you get, you're still probably not going to be able to get to where you need to be to the benchmark. And as time goes on, I know before the firm map was adopted, my personal flood insurance was like $240 a month. I got it this week, and it's in 6 years, 6.5 years, it's gone up to like $1,500. So it's going to continue every year to rise by 15 to 20%. So again, it's important that we get this straightened. It's not part of what we're talking about today, but I'm just saying that if whatever we adopt today, if the federal government adopts, say that use the 500-year flood standard rather than the 100-year flood standard, which they're using today, then we'll be in a world of trouble here, and everybody's going to be paying more for their flood insurance than they pay for their house note and house insurance, so.
And that'll be something else we'll have to address. But just to keep this in perspective, we're trying to address subdivision regulations right now and commercial being in one lump thing because it was kind of three different things going around and it really wasn't, the proper, the commercial had different from subdivision, which is considered commercial. And so, we were trying to keep something that's fairly complicated as simple as possible. And I think that's what, we have something now that we're requiring them to mitigate everything. So we've been at this probably for about 6 or 8 months in a number of meetings. And one way or another, I'd like to see it move forward. We have enough time before the council meeting to take a look at questions about it. And we can make sure that we make a statement on there that this only includes things that are below base flood elevation. That's, which is in here, but it's not real clear.
I got one other thing, Mr. Chairman, if I
Bill.
could. The other thing I see is that subdivisions or commercial developments need to mitigate on-site. I think we need to take away the off-site option of mitigation. It's years, and Ricky and I talked about it. If they do some kind of mitigation off-site, you know, who's gonna police this thing 20 years from now? If it's on another piece of property and, you know, we're afraid that in the years to come, that it can be hard to mandate that property stay as a mitigation, as a storage or whatever, you know, when we're not around. If they're gonna do a mitigation, do it on-site mitigation. If they gotta buy extra property to do the mitigation, I mean, I can't see it being off-site and us being able to handle that.
Well, and I thought we were actually trying to look out there to try to do some mitigation pools and banks for some people. The parish was going to be involved in some of that
Well,
down the line.
if you can buy a storage, a detention area, an area detention system and everything, that's one thing. But I know we've been asked several times to say, okay, well, we can't, you know, commercial development, one is Walmart. It said, well, we can't maintain, mitigate it on site, but how about us going downstream here and doing something? And in the ordinance, it says that, you know, you can do off-site. But then what we're figuring, if they work a deal out with another landowner to do something on their property, how do we, you know, hold that for in perpetuity?
Let's take a look at that.
I mean, it's a deed restriction. If it's on a deed restriction, it's a deed restriction. I don't think that's a problem at all.
Yeah. Let's discuss that.
If you record it as a deed restriction on that property inside the public
Make 'em
record
buy it.
says.
Yeah.
If they're gonna do something, make them purchase it.
Well, and that's it, that's what I'm saying.
But I mean, I wouldn't limit them to doing something on site. I mean, I understand which part of your concern is, but I mean, some property, that's not gonna be,
Well,
not gonna be able
just a
to do
second.
it.
We're
And
getting
again, I don't
off-
have a problem with that, but
We're
once they
getting off the
buy it, that
subject
becomes
matter.
part of the development, and that is not an issue anymore.
But we're getting off, and I understand that's
But that-
important, but we're getting off the subject matter. I want to get back to what we are trying to do. And
But that's in the
Bill,
ordinance
let's get
too.
together,
Okay.
and address that in a separate thing, and we'll put that on the next agenda to discuss that, and we'll take care of that. That way we can, let's do one thing at a time. Try to keep this in perspective, because there's 10 different things we can address.
Can I say something on that topic or not?
Mr. Murphy, since you were involved in the meetings, yes, sir.
My name is Derek Murphy, and I'd like to bring up something. Bill is right about the policing of that, but there's two things to consider when you're dealing with that one of the advantages of being able to do some off-site mitigation is possibly doing some, maybe some channel improvements in the area, something, doing some mitigation. The other thing we've had is, in other parishes that have off-site mitigation such as this, is actually put a mitigation servitude over that property. So it can't be developed, it can't be modified in any way, shape, or form. We actually record maps with that servitude sitting on top of it. So the parish then has some legality. They can come back and say, just like a drainage servitude, just like a utility servitude, this can't be modified. It's here as a servitude. It has to be actually revocated by the council in order for it to go away. So that's just
Okay.
another
Well,
consideration.
let's get Bill, get a working meeting
fine.
with some of
Yeah,
the
that's it.
people
I'm
involved,
okay
and
with
let's
that,
come up with
as long as
something
we're
there.
protected.
But that'll be a different thing. we'll get started on that also. Any other questions? We've been off the subject, hopefully we can stay back on. With that, we're looking for a recommendation on this.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to, anything's gonna beat what we have on the books now, but I'd like to go ahead and let's postpone this to, we have the working meeting with, Mr. Rue and the other parties involved. And, you know, if you need a month or two, let's clear this up and get it back on the agenda.
Yeah, and this, we have a motion.
I'll second that.
Okay, and a second. And this is, we want to stick, again, to this particular thing. Anything else that comes up, we want to address that separately. So let's try to stick to this. We have a motion and a second to table this for next meeting. And let's take a look at it, and we've been pushing back, so let's make sure we take care of this and one way or another look at it for the future. Any objection? Okay, we will table this till the next meeting. And then number 6, discussion of traffic studies and drainage surveys. This came about, Doc and I had been called to a couple of subdivisions to investigate. I know in the past we've had some failures on roads and things on subdivisions, and seeing where the problem was. We were getting different stories as to what the problems were, and so we just wanted to try to get administration to take a look at this and make some recommendations on possible changes. And Doc, you had some observations?
Yeah, actually, Mr. Chairman, forgive me, I think you're talking about item 7 on that. We're on
Oh, I'm
6.
sorry, I skipped over 6. Is it traffic studies and drainage surveys?
Right. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as a bit of history so that everyone understands this, and I'll try to be very brief. We have 2 more meetings yet tonight, so bear with us. Currently, the developers in our parish pay for traffic and both traffic and drainage impact studies. The problem that we're seeing, and I saw this as a commissioner and still as a councilman, and I'm sure every councilman has seen it, these reports always come back, no significant impact. To give you an example of a recent one in my district on Highway 73, we just had preliminary plat approval for the hollows at Dutchtown. I believe that development is going to have something like 197 or 297 home sites. And of course, it came back just dealing with the traffic end, drainage is important obviously too, that there would be no significant impact. I know I testified at that meeting in front of our commission that night and questioned everybody, if there's no impact, why are we widening Highway 73? Furthermore, the citizens who talked apparently believe strongly at that meeting, and I've seen this at others, that this sort of, and you've heard me use this language, forgive me for it, the fox guarding the hen house. If the developer is paying for these studies, perhaps they would be reluctant to come back and conclude otherwise, that there's no significant impact, or if they say there is, you know, that could be a problem. So, solutions. My opinion, I've said this all along, I believe that Ascension Parish should actually collect a fee from a developer, and we'll do traffic first, and then take and hire, the parish hires someone to do the actual traffic impact study. Therefore, we gaining trust, I think, with the public at a very minimum there. I understand President Martinez, and you can maybe speak to this in a minute, he brought our planning director, Mr. Compton, in Chambers last week at the meeting over there in Donaldsonville, the full council meeting, and he spoke to the traffic issue, and I believe in process he said it could be done by use of, like we do with other things, RFPs, requests for proposals, and the companies would throw that in there, and we'd give them some guidelines from our engineers and all, like what we think they should be studying, standard techniques, perhaps some other changes, giving us more input into that as well. And of course, that might be something we could do. However, Mr. Compton also stated in Chambers, and Tommy, maybe you would want to elaborate, not quite sure I understood exactly what he said, but while we could do it for traffic, we could not do this for drainage. And if that's the case, I don't know, but I'll stop there and then throw it out to my fellow councilmen, and maybe Mr. Martinez, you would want to comment as well.
Let me address it first. Okay. I don't think we can legally tell somebody that they can't hire their their own traffic engineer and drainage engineer. I think we do a detailed study of drainage, because we have an in-house drainage engineer that does that. Now, I think that we could charge a fee for us to hire our own engineer to review it, but if someone's gonna spend their money developing a piece of property, we can't tell them, this is how you do your traffic, this is how you do your drainage. They should at least be able to explore all the options they're with. Someone has a piece of property, we zone it and tell them what uses they can use it. We pass all the rules in planning to tell them how they're gonna use it that. Now you're gonna wanna tell them, this is the engineer you gotta use. I think he's got some property rights. He's the property owner, and he's investing in that property. Now, if we wanna have a fee for our own traffic engineer to study his plan and say, hey, that's not right, or to curtail it, I don't think there's a problem. But when you start telling somebody, we're gonna do your studies for you, I don't see how you can do that. There may be more than one way to skin a cat, and I think he's entitled to do that if he's gonna do that, if he's gonna pay for that development.
Well, and Parish President, you?
Well, I agree with O'Neill to a point, but on the traffic, I think it's something that we need to do, and I'm not sure that we need to tell people how to build their subdivision or how the traffic goes, but they can do their own impact study. I'm gonna agree with him on that principle, that we can hire someone to review this, okay? And we can go with 3 different firms maybe and get a task order. And then that way, at least we making sure that study is correct and it's something that people can believe, that it's not coming directly. They're not paying, the fox is not watching the hen house, I'll say like Doc says. But
Yeah, and thanks for the clarification. And I probably didn't explain it well, Mr. Parrington, but that's exactly what I had in mind.
Okay, that's what.
I understand, I fully understand we can't tell people what to do when it comes down to developing their property in that particular respect. But I believe we can, as Mr. Martinez to say to them, let's go through some RFPs and get this independent people, we get the trust back from the people, blah, blah, blah. Maybe these people come up with something, because I find a lot of times that what I'm hearing in Mr. Bob's, I think, here tonight, going back to the Dutchtown Hollows meeting, well, don't worry about it, this is a preliminary plat thing, and we're gonna have another meeting, and, it's at that point in time, we're gonna study it, and so forth and so on. And it sort of becomes many a slip between the cup and the lip, because you get down the line, and we're still into a no-impact situation, and yet these people are telling me, wood ducks are crossing my lawn. And it takes me, we all know right now on 73, the nightmare is traffic, and 621, and, I didn't even mention, besides the Dutchtown Hollows, there's a school being planned now there on this road that we're widening. So I just want to be sure we are definitely getting to the bottom of whether or not there's an impact or not. I see Mr. Trafisi out there again. I know he's experienced this, and I know he's complained to me as well as others that, look, Doc, the more I think about it, there may be something we can do more than just come up and, because what do they have to go on right now? Whatever these guys say, and then I've heard the commission say this, and they said it when I served, and they're still saying it. Well, these guys have got a great reputation, and they can't possibly be wrong, and everything's fine. They couldn't afford to be wrong because their reputation's at stake, et cetera. I don't think the public buys into that too much when every time it comes back, no significant impact. Yet we're widening the roads, and I mean, the Dutchtown Hollows, I heard testimony where the homeowners were telling me that the water was flowing from 621 in front of their home sites to the back toward where the development was going to be off 621. Yet the engineers that did the study said it was the absolute, and I see Mr. Fisi nod his head, opposite. Now, who do I believe? And if I'm a commissioner, how do I make that decision to recommend up to the council, et cetera? So, I don't know, Mr. Parrington, you're saying both processes could happen? We'd have RFPs both ways for drainage and traffic, or?
Well, we do a detailed, we do a drainage analysis of all of them, Mr. Primo does, and I know they send back some significant corrections.
Yes, I've seen that.
But the traffic is, we don't have a traffic engineer. That's why I said, but we're already doing it with, if we want to do it with, if we want to do it that way with drainage, where we have somebody review their plan.
We don't have enough people to do that, and we don't have qualified people to do the traffic impact reviews. So that's what we're saying. If you want to go on RFQs for that type service, that would be something, maybe get 3 firms that do that, and then we'll have a list and rotate.
And we would have to bear the price of that on the RFPs, or?
I think you could charge the developer on each one for review, just like we do with drainage.
Okay.
Mr. Johnson?
Tommy, I've had conversation with Ricky in the past, and maybe O'Neill can chime in on this as well. And I don't know exactly how to quantify it, but I don't know if it's standards or basically the type of traffic study that we do. There's different ones out there. You can set certain limits within those traffic studies to where, I don't know if you call it tighter or what have you, to where you would see, you would have more of an impact, or you would get more subdivisions with an impact to it, as opposed to the type of studies we're doing now. So within house or within ordinance, whatever, do we have the ability to change whatever those settings are within the traffic studies that they're being required to do? It wouldn't necessarily mean we would have to go out and do any RFQs or change, have them still doing it. But if you change your standards for what the acceptable standards or practices are, then it would definitely come back with some kind of an impact on them, a lot more than what we're seeing today. And that's what I would suggest to do right off the bat. You wouldn't be spending any more money, but you could go out there and change it and to get a more realistic picture of exactly what what kind of impacts you're having, as opposed to what we're seeing today.
And
Maybe possible to look at DOTD standards and impact
and what
studies
we're looking-
and go to
well,
that.
what we're asking, the reason we brought this up just as discussion, is we wanted to bring it up and have administration take a look at it, give some options, and/or recommendations, possibly at the next meeting, and we wanted to start that discussion and get moving forward. And this way it'll give administration plenty of time to take a look at it, plenty of options and everything, and come to us with what you think is viable, what would work for us, for the parish. So it was just something we wanted to throw out, along with, the next one is basically the same thing. Take it and digest it, take a look at it, and give us some options that would work from administrative standpoint.
We'll have Jason look at the DOTD impact, how they do their studies, and maybe compare it to what we have on the books, and maybe something that we can do.
I would have him basically take a look at, say, 4 or 5 subdivisions that have previously gone through that and see what the effects would be. I mean, we've had some subdivisions, we've had some effects, but they didn't come out in the study. And so if DOTD's standards are going to say basically the same thing we're getting now, then it wouldn't be effective.
That's correct, but we need to compare them. I don't know what we have now. So.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, just a parting shot here. I have heard Mr. Compton say more than once when I was a commissioner, the current traffic impact studies that we're doing, the developers are doing, aren't quote-unquote worth the paper they're printed on. Now, I know he's not here, and that's a bold statement, but if he was, I'd made it anyway. Mm-hmm. So I agree with Benny. We could maybe somehow guide this process a little better. President Martinez, I like the idea of looking at DOTD. It may not be the end-all solution, see what they're doing, but I've seen studies in my own neck of the woods where the engineering firm comes back and you happen to look at it, and then we go down and we testify in front of planning and zoning, and they did it when school was out during the summer. And you don't have the school buses that they're counting their cars with. They did it on a day where it rained, and traffic was a whole lot less that day than it would have been otherwise. And I'm not an engineer, but I know they did one on Perkins Road, and the numbers that I counted were just incredible, crossing by the railroad tracks when we were trying to rezone some property there. And the traffic impact was said to be not significant. And
Okay.
incredible amount of numbers. And also on the old tennis court thing we had, I remember asking the commission, how many cars go down that road a day? And the answer was 400. Well, if we approve this development, how many is going to go down? About 800. Tell that to the people that live on the street, that 800 cars isn't going to impact their lives.
Councilman Cavan?
Just one comment. I would like to see the DOTD standards, and perhaps we could match those, find ourselves on an equal footing with those. I think that's an interesting proposition. I don't want to do the opposite of an engineering study that finds no impact by putting standards in place that force the finding of an impact. I mean, what we need is realistic, real numbers. That is how we invoke public trust, real numbers. So I hope that what we'll accomplish is something in between making sure the engineers that are hired by the developers are doing it right and making sure that ours are.
Thank you. I guess that sums it up. With that, we have kind of marching orders. President Martinez, we're okay with that? And we'll see what we can get.
Yes, sir. We will have your report next meeting
Okay.
on both, on the drainage and traffic studies. We'll
Thank
give you a full report.
And we may be able to do it, may not.
That's correct. but we'll-
Number 7.
we'll look at it.
Now with discussion of utility construction procedures for subdivisions, something that we had, Doc and I had gone out, we had been on numerous occasions getting reports of failures of roads in subdivisions, and we started taking a look at them. And the facts of the matter is, right now, our procedure is that we go out in the subdivisions, roads are required to be built, and we inspect. They have compaction of the land and everything. Everything gets inspected. They go out there, and Doc and I, as witnesses, everything was great shape. And then different lines come in, water lines, telephone lines, sewage, and so on, other utilities, and the lots and the side of the road is undermined. And so we're getting failures in our roads, and we think maybe it might be a procedural thing that is causing it. It might be a lack of inspection, might be a number of things, but fact of the matter is it's there and it's real, and we don't want to be in that position. And I think Doc and I both agree what we saw is inevitable, that these roads will fail because of what is happening. So, Doc, you want to make a comment?
Yeah. Just to put some faces on names with this particular issue, in my district in D4, Bouillon Crossing is where I've got the most experience, and I believe, Kent, you with Keystone and Galvez, we have shared pictures and have gone out and visited on these sites, and I really appreciate the chairman, bringing this to everyone's attention. Historically, again, Ascension Parish requires a bond on these developers after everything's pretty much said and done. So you have soil compaction, as he indicated, you have the roads already being set, et cetera. Unfortunately, and a comment about that, of course, if the road fails regardless in the first year, that's on the developer's dime. If it fails afterwards, it's on our tab. I mean, invariably, we take these roads into the maintenance system and so forth, and so that's sort of a waiting game. But the utility companies, as Kent says, they will come in there and they will bore underneath these roads after they're set. And sometimes you're talking about anywhere from maybe 1.5 feet to a 2-foot bore to accommodate only a 6-inch pipe. Well, it stands to reason then that the soil's going to collapse around that and so forth, and you're going to get these road failures. So what are solutions? And they're probably illegal, Mr. Parrington, and if they are, I'm sure you'll tell me. The utilities company, perhaps they could put up a bond.
Well, the utilities company don't have a contract with us. They're working for the developer. That's between them and the developer. We don't hire utility companies at all. The
Okay,
developer
well,
makes an
let me-
agreement
let
with
me-
us.
Let me
So
answer that.
whether we hold the developer
The
responsible.
problem is this: utility companies have a monopoly, basically. You cannot go, if you don't want to go to Walmart, you can go to Kmart, or you can go to Ralph's, or you can go to whatever. When you're dealing with either sewer or water or electricity, you're limited to who does that business there. And there is, with our own eyes, we've seen them put in lines that are not sufficiently built to proper specifications. I mean, a blind person can see that. So all we're saying is we are saying that what we're doing right now is not working.
And our recommendation is, and I've talked to Ken about this, that's the contractor's responsibility, to make sure he's building it. it's his job to make them put them in right. Then he needs to do that, or we need to make him more responsible. They're basically a sub.
Mr. Parrington, if you haven't been in construction,
I'm not, but I'm telling you what we can and what we can't do. It's the contractor's responsibility to make sure his subs do his work right. It's not the parish's responsibility to make sure the contractor's subs do their work right. I mean, construction, we have no agreement with the utilities. The utility companies work for the contractor and the developer. They don't work for us.
they technically are, but the Energy, and that's just one of them, hires a sub that comes in there, and they do this, and then they're gone. And there is no recourse for the contractor.
But that's the contractor. Yes, it is. Sue him. That's his issue, not ours. Our issue is the contractor's doing it. I mean, we don't police the contractor. He's got to police his subs.
And I'm trying to figure out why we can't inspect them whenever we inspect a house. They hire somebody to build a house, and yet we inspect that to make sure they put the 2x4s right, they make sure they put the slope right, and everything else. We inspect everything else, but we do not inspect the people that undermine our roads. And that's unacceptable. We have to figure out a way to do this.
Well, we can charge the contractors fees. I mean, that would be the person to be. They're the person responsible for their subs. It's on private property. Those utility servitudes are on private property. And we have given them alternative methods, and nobody wants to follow them because they got to be out there to do it. I think, Ken, go ahead and explain.
Ken?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we did several years ago, I mean, this was an issue, and I think, Mr. Chairman, you brought it to my attention at a meeting that we had contractors that were boring large bores underneath our right-of-way, which is our roads, which caused significant failures in the road itself, at the curb, and all of that. So, direction of Parish President, we had a meeting with the utility companies and the contractors and said, what can we do to possibly resolve this issue? Because when it goes into our right-of-way, that's when we have our inspectors out there looking at the drainage, looking at the sewer, looking at any penetration that comes across their roadbed. But what was happening, once we said, okay, you complete and we're ready to give a final plat, then you had the utilities company to come in afterwards, and what the contractor had initially done was completely undermined. And so they would have go back and try to resolve that. So what we did, as a basis of a kind of compromise, we said that, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we allow, during the construction phase, for you to put down a penetration, a piece of pipe or penetration in there that would allow utilities to go through that. That way, when that goes in between the roads, you locate where water has to go, where cable has to go, where gas have to go. If you have to cross that roadbed, that is put in prior to the final plat, the final inspection being done. It's put in prior to that. It's inspected by our guys, and now you can go underneath that roadbed without having to go through and do a bore, because now that has already been approved. Now, that was kind of, I think even Ben Laurie was here during that time when we had these initial discussions. And it was kind of, after several meetings, it was kind of agreed to that that would be a way to make sure that we were able to look at it, penetration was put in right, and then when utilities come in, they would not have to do any more boring, which caused the problem initially. Now, I think some of that was being done. I heard that there were some issues because it takes a little more planning. Now you have to locate where that's going to be. You have to work with the utility company to say that, okay, we agree that we're going to locate our penetration here, and this way we have to come across to get our services to the other side of the road. It does require a little more planning, but it also protects the parish to make sure that we at least know what's going through our road at the proper time. And that was initially decided we were going to try to do.
And that was as a result of, that was because
Put in
we
formal
were going to
orders, yeah.
require utilities be installed before the final inspection, and
That's right.
nobody wanted that. So that's the
Nobody
two
wanted that, right.
alternatives. You must have all utilities in before final inspection, or you do these penetrations.
Right.
That takes the parish out of being responsible for anybody.
I think that needs to be the ordinance that's passed here.
Yeah.
We got all the information.
Well, and Doc, go ahead.
Yeah, that was gonna be number two when Kent said, let me talk. I figured it would be more legally palatable, Mr. Parrington, with you to, and I had it scribbled down here, let the utility companies come in before. In fact, I even asked the developer on my problem in Bouillon Crossing, could that be done? feigning, which really wasn't faking at all. I'm not an engineer. And he said, well, of course. And it's being done in other parishes. But good luck, I was told, with it, trying to get the utility companies to do just that. So I don't know a lot about that, but I think if we put an ordinance out there, or maybe not even an ordinance, whatever's needed, saying, you guys have to come in there and do this before we compact the soil and put the roads in and everything, it would solve a whole lot of problems.
That's too.
And then number three, and I would back off of it, if we actually get to that level, I was gonna say the bond length of a year is not enough, but I'll stay with a year if we can actually get the utility companies in there first. Thank you for listening.
The problem is, yeah, utility companies want to wait as long as they can before they do their work because they're not collecting on the back end.
right.
So it would have to be mandated by the parish to get them to come in at a certain time. And what we're asking is to try to, administration-wise, figure out where is that time period that they come in and do their work before we disrupt the roads. So if that's what we're looking at, if y'all can make some recommendations that could answer those questions, that's been the problem. Yes, Ms.
Sounds to
Castle?
me like it's as simple as an ordinance that requires it, and I think we should move forward on that.
We did.
Trust won't work.
No,
Ordinance.
ordinance will work.
I'll be
Okay.
happy to make that motion,
Any other
that
comments?
we move to an ordinance.
Well, we just have for discussion. We have discussion today, we have no, and we'll
No
make,
problem.
we'll look at recommendations next month. Anybody has any input? Administration there, please call and have your input before that time period. And with that, we're looking for the mayor.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Johnson, second by Mr. Lambert. This meeting is adjourned.
Tell you something else, Bill Bo.
They want that.